Hi! Today I'm going to talk about two books that I introduced in my last video, Memoirs of a Geisha and Wild Swans. I've owned both of these books for quite a few years. I'm going to talk about both of these books because when I read them they opened my mind. I was at that kind of age where I was still quite closed, and these books kind of opened a new world to me and made me look into those kind of things in more detail. So what I'm going to talk about first is Wild Swans. It was published in 1991 by Chang. She lived in People's Republic of China for a lot of her life and came to England to study. She was the first person from People's Republic of China to receive a doctorate from a British university. Her experiences are kind of all documented within this book. It is also about her grandmother and her mother and their experiences of China, especially through the Communist Revolution. I had not really heard much about China when I read this, and this really was my introduction into that kind of political background and sort of an insight into how it was in that country. So what really struck me in this book was the detail that was gone into about the lives of ordinary people and how the lives of everyone were affected by communism, and in particular how that was received overseas. Where it does go into detail, it's quite telling. My handy, really stylish bookmark. Once I read an article by a Westerner who came to China to see some old friends, university professors, who told him cheerfully how they had enjoyed being denounced and sent to the back end of beyond. I did not realise that the acting that the Chinese were putting on was something to which Westerners were unaccustomed and which they could not always decode. So the way that this book is written really made me think about how we in the West understand these cultures and understand the societies that are presented to us, and how sometimes we don't question what the media presents to us, and that perhaps we should think a lot more deeply about the things that we often take at face value. My next book is Memoirs of a Geisha, which is quite popular. It was made into a film, which I also really enjoyed watching. Obviously this is a work of fiction and it's not written by a Chinese person. It is written in the first person, and when I was younger I didn't quite realise the distance between the author and obviously the main character, and since then I've reread this book many times and I obviously have learnt the difference. But I was quite young when I read this. It was published in 1997 when I was 6. I obviously didn't read it when I was 6. I found this book equally as fascinating as Wild Swans in a different way, whilst they're both about different cultures and different ways that particularly women were treated. I found that Memoirs of a Geisha quite glamorizing in the way that it treats the subject of geishas and the way that it treats their world. It doesn't quite go into the same amount of detail or description that Wild Swans does, but it was still quite moving in the way that the story progressed and the way that the main character views everything around her. So that's basically the two books that I wanted to talk about today, and the way that they kind of opened my mind and affected me. I read them probably between the ages of 13 and 17, and they just really made me think about different ways in which people live, different cultures and different societies, which at the time that you're growing up I think is really important to do. I think it's always a good thing to broaden your experiences. Why are there so many spiders in my house? I think it's really important to broaden the experiences, and obviously I'm not saying that this is completely accurate or a completely acceptable narrative that covers everything in this culture, but I think it really enabled me to open my mind to receiving those other experiences and those reading about those other accounts. And that's something that I really want to continue to do. I'd love to hear any other opinions that anyone might have about these two books, whether you've read them or whether you've just heard about them. I would love to hear your input and I'd love to have a discussion about them. Thanks for listening, and I will see you in future videos. Bye!